back in the day, they were saving at least 15%. Now you could probably save 3 to 5% just on freight rates. And that's because there's leaking of operational inefficiencies, about 12 to 15%, with missed pickups, rework, expedited freight, customer penalties. This is much higher in cost for a company. Leadership thinks that they have a cost problem, so they add controls, more approvals, more routing rules, more rate checks. And what that actually does is it delays and is fragmentation. So instead of optimizing their network, they slow it down because of all the checkpoints. And the real issue isn't cost, it's the lack of alignment in the decision-making process between operations, procurement, sales, and a lack of education on if you choose low cost, you're building fragility. If you're building geographic redundancy, you create resilience. So resilience protects margin over time. Takes longer, might cost a little bit on the front end, but if you design for controlled cost, not low cost, you win in the long run. So that's how I would build, because the most expensive supply chain isn't about that one cost per load. It's about what happens when a load fails.
So welcome everyone to the VSERVE Ebusiness Solutions podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of industry's great experts to share their experiences and also gather a lot of helpful tips along the way. And today we are going to be discussing a lot about 2026 reset, right? There's global logistics, and we have a leader who has spent over 2 decades navigating the front lines of the North American freight. She's the founder and CEO of Shirit Oren Consulting. And she brings an elite enterprise perspective, having served as vice president of sales at Uber Freight. She has led national business development for the Penske Logistics, Dan Ross. She's specialist in, simplifying complex supply chains, and she focuses a lot in cross-border trucking, 3PL growth strategies, operational resilience. I can keep on going, but welcome, Shirit. It's so great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Same here, Shirit. Like, we don't have a lot of female leaders in our podcast. I think you're the second one. So I'm really excited, to talk about everything that you have done and what has brought you here today. And I always start with, before diving into any technical questions or anything like that, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you start? How did you end up in freight of everything? And a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was never my goal to be in logistics or trucking. I ended up taking an inside sales job over the summer at a trucking company at TST Overland, who was known as TNT Overland, the globally company. I was just trying to make up some money for college, university, and they had a program where they actually said, I'm going to pay for your education if you have certain grades and it's business related. So I thought, wow, that's amazing, because I don't have a lot of money to, invest in that. And I definitely want to have my own business one day. So that got me in, and I worked all day and I went to school at night and on the weekends, and they paid for it. I stayed there about 5 years, and once I got into transportation and logistics, I just thought, wow, this is a whole other universe. And I kind of fell in love with the industry, because it was like every day was a completely different day. Every business that I got into had different infrastructures and different ways of doing things. So it was always learning. So I loved it because it kept it fresh.
Perfect, perfect. It's so nice to hear about, where we start from. It's never like we actually looked for that position. And I'm hearing a lot about that in supply chain where it wasn't really your career path in the beginning, but it just kind of became and you fell in love with it along the way. So I know
Yeah.
today we're gonna be deep diving is the word into a lot about the strategy market in 2026 because a lot has changed. So I want to start all the way again, especially with freight. You've noted that 2026 isn't like a freight boom, right? It's not a freight boom here, even though there's pressure test where strategy outperforms the volume. But why do you think there is like this falling strategy, I guess, in the rate shopping in the current market compared to, I guess, 2019?
Yeah, I mean, freight shopping is failing in today's market, especially in comparison to 2019. And that is because the market has excess in 2019, sorry, the market had excess capacity, right? And there was a stable demand where you could move freight around and find marginal savings without breaking anything. And now today's behavior is all inconsistent, unstable. There's a continuous shift with carriers and short term savings. People are losing service reliability. And most importantly, access to committed capacity. You can barely get companies to get you rates for a year now. They always commit to probably 2, 3 months because they don't know how the market is. The market's tightening. And what I see with companies is, back in the day, they were saving at least 15%. Now you could probably save 3 to 5% just on freight rates. And that's because there's leaking of operational inefficiencies, about 12 to 15%, with
Hmm.
missed pickups, rework, expedited freight, customer penalties. This is much higher in
Hmm.
cost for a company than reducing freight rates. So the shift in 2026 is no longer about the lowest rate. It's about the
Hmm.
reliability per cost for the outcome.
Why do you think there has been this operational inefficiencies, or what is actually bringing about these? I guess I think you kind of highlighted about the supply contraction versus the demand driven recovery, and there was apparently a 17% decline in the Canadian freight volume. So, what do you think are the reasons that these things are happening?
Yeah, the Canadian volumes have declined. Spot rates are increasing. And I think a lot of people misinterpret what's happening in the market because when freight volumes drop, the cost should be driven down also, right? But that's not what's happening. That tells you that this isn't demand driven recovery, it's about supply contradiction. Carriers have exited the market, they've reduced their fleets, and they're being more selective with who they are choosing to have as customers. And
Hmm.
so, even when freight volume is low, availability and capacity is tighter. And what that means for shippers is that you're not competing on volume anymore. What you're competing on is consistency and attractive as a customer. And
Hmm.
shippers who win in this area are offering predictable freight, fast payment, operational ease, more
Hmm.
quality relationship type serve partnership.
Hmm. Perfect. I mean, all of this kind of sounds good in theory, right? Like why this is happening or why that's happening. Can you give us like an example of what you've seen recently with one of your customers or your client? It would really help us to kind of put two and two together.
Yeah, sure. So I have some customers. You asked me earlier about why do you think these operational leaks happen, right?
Hmm.
And it has a lot to do with either missed pickups. A lot of carriers don't should have technology to be able to communicate now with their customers, but not everybody does. So you have to be very careful. Um, but the Walmarts of the world have penalties, right? And most carriers don't want to commit to penalties. But, some of these customers are saying, well, listen, if you call in or you say you're going to be late, um, it's okay. But if you just show up late with no communication, I have to pay $2,000 in penalties, right? So a lot of these inefficiencies are all about communication or lack thereof, right? So that's the leak. And I have partners when I vet my partnerships because I have partners that supply trucking, warehousing, technology, and I vet them. Everybody has to have communication and visibility and a very fast reaction, right? You have to be able to communicate and see things in real time. And we are
Hmm.
on the offense, not the defense, right? So we
Yeah.
are constantly in front of any kind of challenges that happen, right? Where it
Yeah.
is geofencing or being able to see what's happening in the future in terms of the trucks and all of that. So that's an example, right there where if you don't have good communication, if a truck
Yeah.
breaks down, like the Walmarts of the world, they have a system where you could say, I'm running late. And as long as
Hmm.
you go within the process, you're not
Yeah.
nobody's getting penalized, right? It's
Yeah.
when people don't have the investment in that communication and visibility, and that's where it goes downhill.
Yeah, definitely. And I know because I've worked with Walmart, so their timings and the way they work in terms of the freight operations is very strict. So I completely understand, where the issues kind of happen, especially with
Yeah.
communication. And I know you have also mentioned that you help kind of break down the actually stick is the word you use. I think there's a lot of times that I've read that where like what do you think when you're helping I guess 100+ million dollar operations, leaders along the way. What are the most common invisible bottlenecks you've seen? Like when you're doing leadership misdiagnosis or simple cost issues, what are the most common things you've seen?
So the biggest one that I see is, and I see this over and over again, and I've been a part of some of these challenges, so I've seen it firsthand, is the decision latency disguised as cost management. Like leadership thinks that they have a cost problem, so they add controls, more approvals, more routing rules, more rate checks. And what that actually does is it delays and is fragmentation. So instead of optimizing their network, they slow it down because of all the checkpoints. And the real issue isn't cost, it's the lack of alignment in the decision making process between operations, procurement, sales, and a lack of education on what each area is supposed to do, right? There's a lot of these cross contamination of accountability, right? And it really comes from the top up to be able to educate people. And, it's a collaboration. So those are the bottlenecks. It's really all internal where those teams aren't aligned and every shipment now becomes a negotiation instead of execution.
Yeah, definitely. And when you put this into the cross-border logistics or even 3PL strategy, I know you have identified a lot of like capacity openings, whether it be Eastern PA, Toronto, Montreal lanes. What technical, advantages do I guess shippers gain when they're committing to volume? When you're talking about backhaul lanes or spot market and stuff like that. I know those are like big words for even me to understand. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So backhaul lanes like Eastern PA, which is what I'm looking for one of my partners, Eastern
Hmm.
PA to Toronto or Montreal, the northbound, structurally, it's imbalanced, right? There's a lot of freight that goes down to PA, but we don't have a lot of freight coming back up. And so what carriers want is they want to fill their empty miles
Yeah.
because there's no cost, right? It now costs them to do business one way. So if you can commit to volume there for anybody that has backhaul, as a great negotiating tip for shippers, you get better pricing, stability in pricing, higher service compliance,
Hmm.
priority during tight capacity. You're building that relationship. You're saving them from losing money and you are gaining lower rates, better service. You're working together. So when things go
Hmm.
rough, now you get priority, right?
Yeah.
So the spot market is reactive, backhaul commitment is strategic. And now you're not
Mhm.
just buying the lane, you are positioning yourself in a carrier's network. You're a partner now.
When you're talking about spot market, if you're putting it, to today's day and age, how has that changed from, I guess, 29 to now?
2019 there was a lot of capacity. All these truckers wanted freight. And the shipping, we had just kind of gotten over a bit of a hump in terms of manufacturing. Everything was coming in. So there was a lot of demand, but there was also a lot of supply. So there wasn't necessarily such a, like, we could find backhaul pretty easily,
Yeah.
right? Because there was a lot more demand and there was so it really became like a pricing war in a way. Back 2019,
Yeah.
shippers were paying just for fuel, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody is so cost conscious because people are holding back, whether because it's tariffs, so they're being more strategic in how they're buying,
Yeah.
right? Or how
Yeah.
they are shipping, or what they're selling, or
Yeah.
buying and selling, right? So everyone's being strategic on their business. But when it comes to transportation, it seems to be like the end of the road where people just think that it's more capacity and it's always there. But now I think what shippers are realizing is that, hey, this is a big problem. And now they're starting to learn that it costs a trucking company every mile they go, right? Not just one way, but also back, right? So if that if they don't know this, they need to know this. So if a company is going, I want to go straight to PA, but they don't have freight back, they are paying a higher rate per mile for that southbound lane because that company doesn't have anything coming back. But if they have constant flow. These are the questions shippers need to be asking. Where do you have constant flow? That way your one way is not suffering so much, right? But the key is try to get carriers that have those backhaul lanes because you're filling a need, they're grateful, and you are also benefiting financially from that and service-wise.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So when we talk about the missing layer in a service, say of mid-market distributors, um, and how they lose when they go from transactional broker to, I guess, an enterprise-led logistic provider. What do you think that is when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar division like Penske or Day and Ross versus today's mid-market distributors? What is that missing layer?
So the biggest gap is the commercial to operational translation. So
Mhm.
the transactional broker executes loads, but an LLP like a Penske or a 4PL, they orchestrate the network.
Yeah.
But in mid market, what often gets lost is understanding how the deal was sold, why certain commitments were made, and what success actually looks like to a client. So,
Mhm.
you end up with this disconnect where sales sees a vision, operation executes a process. And that's what I do differently because I've worked in both things. I've worked as a broker, I've worked as an LLP and managed transportation. And what's missing is that ability to bridge those two worlds of solutions and performance and being able to execute what was promised, right? And having that overview with that vision of, hey, it might not be my business to know where your product was manufactured. But if I know that it's manufactured there and I know that you have 3 weeks before it lands to shore, and I know that you don't always have visibility as to when it gets to shore, right? Maybe you don't have good communication. So now I have to adjust my expectation in terms of my lead time from what I'm getting to you to there. Whereas a
Yeah.
broker, you got 5 minutes to find me a load sometime, right? They are not thinking past, they're not getting that big overview. So
Yeah.
being able to understand the whole operation and then execute the one part, everything is part of a whole system.
Exactly. And I mean, I know this is like too many questions about the same thing, like,
Sorry,
backhaul and spot
I could
market.
go on and
Yeah, it is so fascinating to learn, but I do want to move to, like, technology and AI and obviously, future readiness. But one last question about that is how complex do you think are, private fleet when they become are they more of a liability when they're an asset, or yeah, I mean, like, what is that like when you're talking about, I think you talk a lot about that in terms of dedicated contract carriages, right? It's called DCC. So,
I've sold private fleets for Penske and for Day and Ross, and
yeah.
private fleet becomes a liability when your network variability exceeds your fleet's flexibility. So, in
Mhm.
simple terms, your volumes fluctuate, your lanes shift, and your customer mix frequently shifts. And now a fixed fleet becomes ineffective
Yep.
or inefficient. So,
Yep.
today's fuel volatility, for example, the risk is amplified in terms of cost. So,
Hmm.
a carrier with a fleet has fixed labor costs, they have fixed equipment costs, they have exposure to fuel swings, right?
Yeah.
So, if their network complexity reaches to a point where the utilization drops below the consistency thresholds, you're better off with a hybrid model where you have maybe a core dedicated team and then the flexibility is outsourced. So uh,
Perfect.
it
Perfect.
it really is let that variability. And a lot of people who have this are people who are in retail. They need things timely, so they get a private fleet, but they have variable volumes, right? So sometimes when the volume dips, like
Hmm.
now, right, people are being more selective, or maybe their product is now become more seasonal, or they've had to shift different things. That fleet is now costing them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually a good transgress to, technology and AI.
Yeah,
Because when you talk about, shift to laser or vision guided systems and how critical they are for warehouses that are looking at the, last mile things, um, how does that, work for you and your consulting companies and for your customers when you introduce new technology and AI right now in this market?
so the big buzzword right now is AGV, automated guided visibility.
Hmm.
And the traditional AVGs require fixed infrastructure.
Hmm.
That doesn't work in a dynamic warehouse environment, though, especially where labor is inconsistent. So, vision guided and laser guided systems adapt in real time now. And that matters because rural and last mile can't rely on stable labor pools.
Yeah.
The layouts change more frequently. Throughput demands are less predictable.
Hmm.
So the value isn't just automation, it's the adaptiveness of that automation that's
Yeah.
really important for buyers to understand.
Wow. Okay. But you also advise, the one thing I've seen on your website is about builds for, risk, don't react to it. So that's, I think that's one phrase that you use. So what where do you think the AI has kind of played a picture in this when you're looking at the ROI picture, or receiving or outbound dispatches? How has that changed overall?
Yeah. So outbound, without a question, is where the ROI is.
Mhm.
Inbound expectations are important, but they're controllable. You have that time, right? Where outbound failures hit customers, they hit revenue, brand reputation. There's a lot more at risk there. So
Yeah.
if a shipment didn't go out correctly, the cost multiplies, right? Expedites, penalties, lost in trust is actually the
Yeah.
most costly. So AI and outbound dispatch allows you to predict failures before they happen, intervene in real time, and protect revenue, not just the process, right?
And how about theft? Like, pretty much cargo theft has gone to a whole new level, right? With
It's so
technology and AI.
sophisticated. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you doing, to vet your carrier networks, and how's that changed over the past, I guess, 2, 3 years now with AI?
Yeah. So in the last 24 months, I've shifted my compliance based vetting to behavior based vetting. So it's no longer enough just to check insurance, enough authority. Because
Mhm.
even if you have technology, how are you using it? Right?
Yeah.
How are you managing your business with it? It's not just for
Exactly.
emails and, communication. Now it's about a digital footprint consistency, load acceptance behavior, right?
Yeah.
GPS integrity and tracking reliability, patterns of lane participation, and cargo theft. It, like you said, is so sophisticated. So your network has to be more intelligent.
Yeah.
Trust is no longer static. It's like it's a continuous evaluation because also technology is
Mhm.
continuously improving, but so are those people taking advantage of it for their own interest?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to be on top of it. And it really comes down to that behavior of, are you continuously improving?
Yeah, definitely. And I know, I kind of move on. We are really short on time, but I want to move on a lot in terms of leadership and how you execute things, obviously. AI is such a huge thing. We'll definitely cover it the next time you're on my show. But when you're doing consultancy, right? Your own show, it's mostly built on what I've read or understood is grit, grace, and grounded expertise. So tell us a little bit more about that philosophy. How does that translate into your, technical sales, your logistics, SaaS? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I like to use the word grit, which in my world means you stay complex. You stay in complex deals long enough to uncover like a real problem, like you dig deep, right? There's always underneath the surface of what people think their problem is, there's always way more. That's the real issue. And that's where you find the
Hmm.
savings. That's
Yeah.
where you find the gold. But a lot of people, it's hard to get there. They don't want to see it, or maybe they don't see it themselves because they don't see it from our angle. Um, and then the
Yeah.
grace is, I don't force the sale, right? I don't force anything. I guide the buyer to clarity, right? Because it's
Yeah.
got to be a partnership. They got to be able to see it and want it and put value in it. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So grounded expertise means everything you recommend is executable and not theoretical. So in a SaaS sale, especially, you don't just sell features, you teach the buyer
Mhm.
how to think about their problems differently. So that's how you win your deals. That's how I win.
Perfect. And you do say, logistic isn't about normalizing, it's shifting. So, um,
Yeah.
if you were, designing supply chain networks from scratch today, how would you prioritize, absolute, say, well, what do people look for? Low cost and, geographic redundancy. How do you work on that?
Yeah, well, if you choose low cost, you're building fragility. If you're building geographic redundancy, you create resilience. So, resilience protects margin over time. Takes longer, might cost a little bit on the up on the front end, but if you design for controlled cost, not low cost, you win in the long run. So that's how
Yeah.
I would build, because the most expensive supply chain isn't about that one cost per load. It's about what happens when a load fails. What's the
Yeah.
cost of that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, oh god, sure. It's been such fun having you here. But before I go down and, kind of exit from this podcast, one question I always ask before I let anybody go is, what is your I would say top 3 today advice to the future generation who are trying to maybe one day build their own business in consulting, or looking to kind of get into freight. What would your advice be for today's leadership people?
Who am I advising? Leadership in a
Like leadership professionals, the new ones that are entering the market now.
Okay. So, I would say collaboration is
Hmm.
one of the most important things. You got to listen to the people working for you, but no one should be a superstar on their own. Everybody has to work together.
Yeah.
Look at the big picture, not
Hmm.
just what's in front of you. And you need technology for that. So you need to invest in technology, understand how it's used as a tool, not as a replacement of people, but as a
Yeah.
tool. Get good people, get them
Hmm.
to work together, and use
Yeah.
good technology. That's what I would
Definitely.
say.
Yeah, and that's really important today with AI, because I've already starting to hear so many, stories out of there about AI replacing labor and just like suffering terribly. So that's perfect advice. And before I go, I know you don't want to bring it up right now, but you did have a book coming out as well in a few months here, or weeks, I'm not sure. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, share a little
Sure.
bit about the book? Oh, you
Sure.
have it right there. Perfect.
I have it. I have it right here. It's called
Perfect.
Need Behind the Need, and
Wow,
it's
that
sold
looks
on
amazing.
Thank you. Sold on Amazon. I'm having a book launch July 4th. If you're in
Okay.
Toronto, I'll put out the details on my LinkedIn, or I'll give it to you to put out. Um, and if not, it's available on Amazon actually right now. I'm working on the Audible part of it. And what it's about my journey in sales, in logistics, in supply chain. It is transferable to other industries, but it really talks about uncovering problems, whether you're in operations or you're in sales. That it's called the need behind the need, because when you first think that you have a problem, it's like when you're in sales now and somebody says, well, the price is a problem. It's actually not the problem. There
Yeah.
is a deeper problem underneath that either the client doesn't know about, because maybe they're not looking at their big picture, that big network that they have.
Hmm.
They're just
Yeah.
looking at what they're doing, or they don't want to know about it because they rather fix a band-aid than they don't have control over fixing what's really the big problem. So if
Yeah.
you got to think deeper, right? Or give people an idea, because most people are not trying to lie or delude anybody what their problem is. They just don't understand or know from
Hmm.
a logistics perspective.
Yeah.
So I always talk about slowing down, understand all the dynamics before you try to sell your solution, because you'll find I sold a $1 billion deal, and for transportation uh, management. And I didn't sell it on price at all. In fact, the client asked me to put more money in the deal, and the real issue was change management. How do you deal with bad communication? How do you deal with that? And how do you deal when you make a mistake? Do you take accountability or do you not? What are you the steps? How do you learn and how do you grow? That is what sold my $1 billion deal. I would have never thought that selling
Yeah.
transportation,
Yeah.
right? So
Exactly.
I talk a
Definitely.
lot about that as well, the strategy on how to dig deep, find that gold.
Well, that's something for us all, right? I'm in sales too, so that's something that's gonna help us too. Sure. Thank you so much for joining today, sharing a piece of your book with us, and also helping us understand a little bit more about the freight world. I think it's the first time we've talked about freight in such detail, and in such easier words to understand. So thank you so much. Any thoughts before we end the podcast today?
No, I just wanna thank you so much for having me and giving me an opportunity. I could talk for hours on all of this. So, I had a great time with you, and these are great questions. And, yeah, thank you for having me.
Same here, Harry. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to have a conversation with you and everybody who is looking to learn a little bit more about Shreet. You can do reach her at shiritoren.com. She's available on LinkedIn as well. But thank you so much for joining us, and you have a good day.
Thank you.